Welcome, learner, to today's deep dive. Usually when we talk about electronic dance music, there is a very specific, undeniable expectation of kinetic energy.
Oh, absolutely.
You picture a packed crowd, laser lights cutting through a dark room, and, that moment when the DJ drops the bass.
Yeah, that physical shockwave.
Exactly.
Hmm.
The sound system hits you in the chest. It's an environment built entirely around sweat and adrenaline.
It demands a physiological response. I mean, club music is engineered to overwhelm the senses, forcing your body to move simply by displacing massive amounts of air through the speakers.
Right.
We naturally gravitate toward that sheer mass of sound pressing against us when we want to feel energized.
But then, you step into the world of Chillstep and Liquid Dubstep, and that entire sweaty, high-intensity club environment it just evaporates.
It's completely vanished.
Instead of a shockwave, we find ourselves in a sonic landscape that functions much more like a sensory deprivation tank.
Which represents a massive pivot in audio engineering. It's the practice of taking tools designed for chaos and reprogramming them to manufacture absolute tranquility.
And that is the exact mission we're taking on for you today. If you are someone who loves connecting the dots between internet culture, technology, and art, you are going to want to settle in for this.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating intersection.
Our source material today is an incredibly detailed column from MMR, Monumental Movement Records, published in December of 2025.
And this piece thoroughly explores the history, the actual sonic anatomy, and the cultural impact of chillstep and liquid dubstep.
It really does. The author treats this genre with a rare level of analytical respect.
They really do. We are going to decode how the internet took an aggressive, heavy-hitting club genre and effectively reverse engineered it.
Right.
The result is a sanctuary of peace, a masterclass in utilizing blank space, and a genre deeply tied to cinematic visuals.
By the end of this deep dive, you will never hear a chill playlist the same way again.
No, you really won't.
You are going to understand the exact acoustic architecture that forces your nervous system to relax. Okay. Let's unpack this.
Sounds good.
To really appreciate what chillstep is, we have to examine the aggressive DNA it mutated away from. We are tracing the roots back to late 2000s UK dubstep.
Right, so picture the London underground scene right around 2005 to 2008.
The really gritty era.
Exactly. The pioneers of this era, acts like Scream, Benga, and Digital Mystics, they were defining traditional dubstep.
Yeah.
They built tracks around heavyweight sub-bass that literally rattled your teeth in your
It's
skull.
a massive low end.
Huge! And they used these aggressive guttural wobble synths that sounded like grinding metal, paired with incredibly strong snapping snare drums. The aesthetic was dark, urban, and undeniably heavy.
But then you fast forward just a few years to that 2008 to 2010 window, and the entire landscape just fractures.
Yeah, a total shift.
The internet, specifically the rise of YouTube and SoundCloud, steps in as a global distribution network. You start seeing artists like Mount Eden pioneering an entirely new, deeply melodic approach.
It was a massive departure.
It really was. They essentially hijacked the genre, taking the skeleton of dubstep, but replacing all the muscle and tissue.
That's a good way to put it. They kept the foundational blueprint, but fundamentally altered the sound design.
How so? Exactly.
Well, in production terms, they took that wide, aggressive waddle bass, which was originally created by rapidly modulating synthesizer frequencies to create a jagged, tearing sound.
Right, that classic wah-wah sound.
Exactly. And they smoothed it out. They slowed the modulation down to a gentle sway. On top of that, they drastically increased the ratio of organic acoustic instruments.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Suddenly, dubstep had grand pianos, sweeping orchestral strings, and lush synthesizer pads.
And they also completely changed the behavior of the sidechain compression.
They did, yeah.
For anyone who doesn't produce music, sidechain compression is a mixing technique where you tell a specific sound to duck out of the way when another sound plays. In club dance music, they heavily sidechain the bass to the kick drum. So every time the kick drum hits, the rest of the track violently dips in volume.
Yeah, it creates this aggressive, gasping, pumping effect.
But the melodic producers backed off that aggressive threshold.
Exactly. They altered the release curve of the compression so that instead of a violent pump, the track achieves a softer, rhythmic dynamic.
Like it's breathing.
Yes. The music seems to slowly inhale and exhale around the percussion rather than hyperventilating.
It makes me think of taking the roaring, aggressive 1,200 horsepower engine of a monster truck and carefully re-engineering it so it hums flawlessly inside a luxury hovercraft.
That is a perfect analogy.
You still have all that power, all that low-end weight pushing you forward, but the friction has been entirely removed from the ride.
And the structural focus also shifts completely here. Traditional club dubstep relies on the anticipation of the drop.
Right, that big moment.
Right, that singular moment where the tension breaks and the bass hits you over the head. But this new internet-born sound pushed the drop into the background
They de-emphasized it.
entirely. They started prioritizing the atmospheric buildup and the emotional arc of the melody itself.
Which raises an essential question about the physics of the music itself.
Yeah.
How exactly do you engineer that specific frictionless hum without losing the foundational weight of dubstep?
That's the real trick.
Yeah, to figure that out, we have to look under the hood of that luxury hovercraft.
The blueprint outlined by the MMR piece is remarkably rigid.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the foundation of this architecture is the sub-bass. The defining symbol of Chillstep is a smooth sub-bass, which producers construct using pure sine waves.
Okay.
In acoustic physics, a sine wave is the most fundamental sound possible. It has no sharp edges, no harsh overtones, and no harmonic distortion. It is just a perfectly round, low-frequency tone.
But, I mean, a pure sine wave is notoriously difficult to hear on regular speakers, isn't it?
Yeah.
If it's too pure, it just vanishes on anything smaller than a massive globe system.
Right, exactly. So the solution is a microscopic application of distortion, specifically soft clipping.
Soft clipping.
Yeah, they run that pure sine wave through algorithms that mimic old analog vacuum tubes. It adds just enough harmonic warmth so the human ear can perceive it without reintroducing the jagged edges of a score wave.
That's brilliant.
It is. Then, instead of attaching that fast, aggressive wobble, they use low-frequency oscillators, or LFOs, set to a very slow quarter note or eighth note rate.
So it's not frantic at all.
Not at all. The bass begins to swell and recede. It mimics the natural push and pull of an ocean tide.
And floating on top of that tide are the synthesizers.
Yes.
The source notes a heavy reliance on soft saw waves and incredibly wide stereo pads. But again, the producers run these sounds through aggressive filters to suppress all the harsh upper-level overtones.
Right. It wraps the entire melody in velvet.
The pianos are treated similarly too, washed in dense, long reverb, but with very low pre-delay.
Which is key. Low pre-delay means the echo engages instantly alongside the original note.
Okay, so it blurs it.
Exactly. It effectively washes out the sharp percussive attack of the hammer striking the piano string, leaving only the lingering resonance of the chord.
Wow.
Structurally, this feeds into the cardinal rule of Chillstep. The emotional peak of the song must sit on the sustain of the melody, never on the percussive impact.
So you find catharsis in the long, fading tail of the string section, not in the crash of a cymbal.
Exactly.
Okay, but hang on. I'm looking at the notes here regarding the tempo, and I have a major question.
Sure.
The source states the standard tempo for Chillstep is around 140 beats per minute.
That's right.
140 BPM is objectively fast. We are talking about techno or high-energy trance speed. If the entire goal of this genre is sensory deprivation and absolute tranquility, how on earth are they achieving that at a sprinting tempo?
What's fascinating here is the psychological trick of the halftime drum structure.
The halftime trick.
Yeah. The underlying grid of the producer software is indeed racing along at a rapid 140 beats per minute.
Okay.
But the producer anchors the heavy snare drum hit on the third beat of the measure instead of the usual second and fourth beats you'd hear in house music.
Oh.
By spacing the primary percussive hits so far apart, it forces your brain to perceive the tempo as exactly half as fast, like a marching, methodical 70 beats per minute.
So the high-speed grid allows for intricate, high-resolution details, but the body only registers a slow, spacious pulse.
Exactly. The producer gets the best of both worlds. You have fast-paced energy dancing in the background through tiny rhythmic details like 16th note hi-hats or shakers.
Little sparkling sounds.
Right. But the primary groove your nervous system locks onto is completely unhurried. It creates a massive amount of rhythmic space.
And they use that space to build physical environments. The source highlights the heavy use of background noise layers mixed beneath the synths, the sound of wind rushing through trees, rain hitting a window, the crackle of a vintage vinyl record, or the continuous hiss of analog tape.
Right. They are essentially acting as Foley artists. They're sound designing a physical location for you to inhabit before a single musical note even plays.
Creating those specific locations required immense restraint, which leads us directly to the pioneers who figured out how to balance this technical blueprint with raw emotion.
Yes, the architects of the genre.
Exactly. Black Mill and Midas are two of the artists who built this genre, and exploring their work helps explain how Chillstep eventually fractured into different elements, specifically the shift toward water-based textures in liquid dubstep.
Well, any serious analysis of this era absolutely has to start with Blackmill.
Without a doubt.
He is universally recognized as the undisputed symbol of Chillstep. He gained massive international fame entirely in tandem with the explosion of early YouTube music channels.
The Black Mill formula is iconic at this point. The MMR piece points out his signature combination of extremely clean tidal sub-bass mixed with floating trance-like arpeggios.
Yes.
His drops are famous because they don't attack the listener, they envelop you. It feels like stepping from a cold street into a warm, firelit room.
And he achieved that envelopment through a very specific, almost classical restraint.
Like with his chords.
Exactly. His chord progressions are deceptively simple. He leans heavily on a classic 1-5-6-4 piano progression.
The IVV.
Right. For context, this is the exact same chord structure used in almost every massive emotional pop ballad of the last 50 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it subconsciously triggers a feeling of resolution and nostalgia for the listener almost instantly.
That's so smart.
He pairs those familiar chords with slow attack strings, meaning the string sound takes a full second to swell to maximum volume, and he blankets the whole mix in that wind-like white noise. The result is immensely lyrical.
Then you have an artist like Midas,
Yeah.
who brought a literal classical background to the scene. As a classically trained pianist, he bridged the gap between pure chill step and the more energetic melodic dubstep.
Yeah, Midas introduced a level of transparency to the mixing process. His tracks allow you to hear every single element with crystalline clarity.
Right?
He brought in soaring, energetic risers from the trance world, and he was crucial in pioneering the use of highly processed vocal chops.
Which became you.
Massive. He would take tiny snippets of a human voice and play them on a keyboard like a synthesizer, adding a layer that felt deeply human yet completely synthetic at the same time.
And as these producers continued refining these sounds, a fascinating mutation occurred: liquid dubstep.
Yes.
It pulls heavily from the textures of liquid drum and bass, and the source makes a very clear, deliberate distinction between the two styles.
It does. While Chillstep is defined by the night, leaning into foggy, windswept ambiances, and analog warmth, liquid dubstep is defined entirely by water.
Interesting.
It has a slick, highly transparent acoustic texture.
The high-end frequencies are engineered to glisten, giving the tracks a glassy, shimmering quality. The bass is even smoother than Chillstep, often lacking the tidal LFO fluctuation entirely.
Exactly.
You get highly specific sound design choices, like synthesizer one-shots that pop like bubbles, and an overwhelming ratio of those chopped-up, airy vocals.
Because the aesthetic target is entirely different. The brain processes dry, windswept textures differently than it processes the bright, sparkling resonance of water.
To crystallize the difference for you listening, if Chillstep is the experience of standing in a misty, dense pine forest on a quiet, cool night, liquid dubstep is the sensation of scuba diving through a sunlit, sparkling coral reef.
That's a perfect visual. The focus shifts entirely to the environmental texture surrounding the listener.
But the thing is, whether you're standing in that misty forest or floating through that sunlit reef, you aren't just hearing these environments. The defining feature of this era is that listeners were physically seeing them on their screens.
Yes.
This brings us to a crucial piece of the puzzle:
Yeah.
the visual platform that birthed the movement.
This stands as arguably the most unique characteristic of the genre. Chillstep didn't just spread as a style of audio.
Right.
It spread as a unified, inseparable visual culture.
The YouTube compilation era. If you were searching for music on the internet in the 2010s, you know this exact phenomenon.
Oh, yeah.
You would search for a mix to study to or to help you fall asleep, and you were immediately met with a highly curated aesthetic.
The channels uploading these tracks relied on very specific imagery. Night skies, thick fog, dense forests, or enemy landscapes.
Always.
The color grading always favored low saturation, moody, cinematic tones. The videos featured slow-motion footage of water drops or deep space photography. It offered a rich, lo-fi visual texture that matched the audio perfectly.
And the synchronization between the music and the visuals was just mesmerizing. The source describes these perfect moments of accidental synergy.
Yeah, the happy accidents.
Right. You might be watching a video loop of a calm lake reflecting distant city lights, and it pairs flawlessly with the slow spread of a synthesizer pad. The visual reflection on the water resonates with the overtones of the music. A shooting star streaks across the screen in exact time with a fast, twinkling arpeggio.
It's powerful stuff.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Looking at this history, it poses a major chicken or egg scenario.
Okay.
Did the visual aesthetics of YouTube actually start dictating the music production?
Yeah.
Like, were audio engineers intentionally adding rain sounds and cinematic strings specifically to match the moody thumbnails their tracks were inevitably going to be uploaded over?
The historical evidence points to yes. It became a symbiotic feedback loop.
Really?
Yeah. The internet algorithms and the curators running these massive YouTube channels actively sculpted the audio choices producers made.
Because they needed the placement.
Exactly. If you were an up-and-coming producer and you wanted your track featured on a channel with 3 million subscribers, your song needed to visually sound like the imagery that channel promoted. Wow.
So the producers stopped just writing songs. They began scoring static images and looping GIFs. The boundary separating the audio engineer and the visual curator completely dissolved. It became a true multimedia genre.
And that deep integration of sound and environment didn't stay trapped in the 2010s. It has evolved into incredibly sophisticated ways of engineering what the MMR column calls blank space today.
Right, modern mixing techniques in this space are completely obsessed with the concept of blank space.
How so?
Well, the current generation of producers isn't trying to impress the listener with density or strength. They're focused on establishing temperature and breathability.
If we go back to our hovercraft analogy from earlier, where the goal is removing all the friction from the ride, the modern technical methods for achieving that are fascinating.
They really are.
The column points out that modern producers actively suppress the 5 to 7 kilohertz frequency range in their master mixes.
Which is a very specific choice. It is. In human biology, our ear canals naturally resonate at those frequencies. It's the exact range where harsh consonants live, where a baby crying registers, and where the sharp crash of a cymbal hits.
Right.
So by mathematically carving that specific frequency band out of the track, they remove any subconscious physical irritation for the listener.
It's pure acoustic psychology, and the treatment of vocal chops has also evolved drastically to match this. Today, producers rely on granular processing.
Okay, to picture granular processing, imagine taking a high-resolution photograph of a singer, shredding it into 10,000 microscopic pieces of confetti, tossing them into the wind, and taking a picture of the cloud.
That is precisely what the software does to the audio waveform.
That's wild.
It freezes the vocal sample, shatters it into milliseconds of sound, and smears them together.
Wow.
Then the producer applies a high-shelf EQ, basically boosting the highest, airiest frequencies in the mix. The vocal completely stops sounding like a human being in a room. It transforms into an ambient texture, sounding more like a ghost exhaling in the background.
And they carry that dampening effect into their effects processing as well, right? Like heavily cutting the high frequencies on their reverbs.
Exactly.
Usually reverb adds a bright, echoing shimmer to a track. But by removing the highs, the echo sounds thick and muffled. It effectively mimics the acoustic properties of shouting into heavy fog.
And moving through the 2020s, we see this intentional dampening evolving even further. Chillstep is actively fusing with modern lo-fi aesthetics.
Oh yeah, the lo-fi beats to study the vibe.
Exactly. You hear far more organic percussion today. Producers are stripping out synthetic drum kits entirely and replacing them with field recordings of tapping on wood, striking stones together, or tearing heavy paper.
And they are fully integrating this soundscape with modern media pairing tracks, with VR environments, underwater drone footage, and those first-person high-definition nature walk videos on YouTube.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate here.
Sure, go for it.
Looking at all these techniques, constantly subduing frequencies, carving out the highs, relying on simple progressions, and avoiding absolutely any kind of musical aggression, does this genre run the risk of just becoming high-end background noise?
Yeah.
Is it just internet elevator music disguised as art?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to examine the baseline environment the modern listener is living in.
Okay.
The contemporary human brain is severely overstimulated. We are bombarded with aggressive information, algorithmic notifications, and high-contrast media during literally every waking second.
That's true.
In that specific context, intentionally engineering blank space isn't just creating background noise, it is a radical, necessary antidote.
The sanctuary.
Exactly.
Okay.
It functions as one of the very few spaces in digital culture where absolutely nothing is demanding your immediate attention. It gives the listener's central nervous system permission to just power down.
So what does this all mean? Let's trace the arc of the journey we just took. We started in the damp underground clubs of London, analyzing a sound designed to aggressively rattle your rib cage and demand physical movement.
Right.
And we watched as a generation of internet-native producers, armed with simple pop ballad chord progressions, smooth sine waves, and a brilliant use of rhythmic illusion, flipped the entire purpose of the genre upside down.
They traded the anticipation of the bass-heavy drop for lingering emotional resonance.
Yeah.
They proved that meticulously crafting a sense of temperature and breathing in a track can be just as powerful and have just as much lasting cultural impact as sheer deafening volume.
Chillstep became a cinematic, visual-heavy sanctuary of sound for an overstimulated generation.
It truly serves as a masterclass in emotional engineering.
It does, and it leaves us with something pretty wild to think about as we move forward.
Oh,
Yeah, think about it. If a massive, globally recognized genre of music was birthed specifically by the visual culture of static YouTube thumbnails and 2D video compilations,
right.
what happens next?
That's a huge question.
As we rapidly enter an era of fully immersive, AI-generated virtual realities, what will that new visual culture demand of music production?
Right.
Will the next major music genre be composed entirely and dynamically by algorithms designed to perfectly match the artificial physics,
Right.
the shifting weather, and the digital fog of the virtual worlds we inhabit? Will we eventually step out of the sensory deprivation tank of Chillstep and into an entirely artificial algorithmic club?
It's entirely possible.
Something to ponder next time you put on a pair of headphones. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.